This is Chapter 1 of the Bubble Bath Paradox by Steve Parker. New Dawn Fades. A cold overnight rain with delusions of snow had slushed some of the grass. It was melting into a fog that merged with the cloud of my breath and caught the low slant of dawn light. I sauntered across the mall towards a small museum on the eastern end, soundlessly humming some simple tune I cannot now recall. The transit stop was far enough away, and I also needed to stop at the lab on the way, so the morning of the event/accident started with a nice sunrise walk. These sunrise walks were an indulgence of mine. In the summer, I would arrive at work and have hours alone. As the sun slouched away from the recent winter solstice, I might be late if my coworkers ever showed up on time. The disk of the rising sun was obscured by the former chapel, now museum, where we would be conducting the day's experiment. A glory light framed the steeple, implying that it hid some divine mystery. I tried to capture it with the camera on my wrist phone, but everything was too overexposed. If I'd saved the picture, it would have been the last picture of the museum. Most of the structure would be gone in a few hours. We had set up in the former chapel because we had good footage of over 100 cultists performing a ceremony to consecrate an ornate cross artifact shortly after it was modified to its current form. It still exists as far as I know. I'm not clear on where the core of the jewel-studded cross came from. It was massively enhanced by the addition of precious metals and probably a lot of lead, as well as all the huge semi-precious gemstones that covered it. It was so heavy as to be impossible for us to move it, given the budget constraints of the experiment. Several groups now insist that the core item was actually an ancient alien artifact with strange powers. In the ceremony, each person stood on a small stool and kissed a particularly large gemstone near the top. One after another, headed almost the same spot for several seconds. The museum had been a chapel for almost 100 years before it fell into disuse and then landed on an alternate purpose. It became a 20th century cultural artifact museum. It was easy to get permission to set up the experiment here. I was very excited about this sampling location. This was the first location where we would be able to sample brain tissue from perhaps 100 individuals using just one sampling setup. It turns out to be extremely difficult to find footage with an accurate timestamp, where large numbers of people put their heads in a well-defined location. We thought we might even be able to sample general areas in the brain, not specific neurons or anything, but cerebellum, cerebrum, right half, left half. This was a big find. I ran over the possible ways of spinning the likely results as I walked. I knew there would not be many, if any, big changes in the DNA from a brain of someone just 40 years ago. My colleagues in the department repeated this opinion whenever they were allowed half a chance. Shining a spotlight on someone whose research was circling the drain made their own petty failures appear less depressing. Since my entire field of research appeared to be failing, I was an attractive target for derision, sitting in the middle of the giant bullseye of public opinion. There might be more interesting differences in the RNA. Perhaps the RNA of the cultists might mirror the ritual practices used by cults of the time. Going over the same nonsensical but emotionally engaging information repeatedly, often in a calorie deficient, especially a protein calorie deficient state, should have resulted in physiological changes that might be noticeable in the RNA transcriptome of the brain cells. Revisiting an emotionally triggering event deepens an emotional track it carves in the brain. And so other thoughts and actions, even those that are unrelated, tend to follow that track. This requires that the finger-like projections of the brain's neurons get more robust where they follow the track and wither where they do not. This wiring change requires specific proteins, and specific RNA is required to guide the manufacture of those proteins. The complement of RNA in a cell is called the transcriptome. In art and expression, this is a very healthy phenomenon that brings all sorts of brain activity onto an expression track. It is a type of extreme focus that many less artistic people call talent. Lovers, if they are lucky, can form the bonds that are a core component of a healthy human condition. In parents, the focus track results in thoughts orbiting their children. Thoughts of a future, or activities, or local dangers all begin to wear the faces of their children. The track can also be a causal mechanism for post-traumatic stress reinforcement, and in this damaged state, I prefer to call it a rut. Cult leaders from a few decades ago would use calorie deficiency to elicit a trauma state and accelerate the formation of a trauma brain rut. My waking brain was no longer as peaceful as the morning. I was running a particularly fanciful fantasy loop in my brain, trying to create a happy track for the day. I fantasized that if I was able to get samples that showed transcriptome differences between the cultists and farmed, or even open present-day individuals, then I could spin those data into a narrative on cultural evolution. I might even be able to craft some quotable passages whose citation-amplifying use by marketing branches of various farms could result in the appearance of real impact. Grant money would flow in. I might be interviewed by some journalist of some kind. I might become famous. I knew I was in a bad place when I started fantasizing about the impact of data from samples that had yet to be collected. I blamed my brain's retreat to a fantasy-happy place on the fact that it had been a bad month for me in dealing with time-sampling detractors. One of the worst detractors was Peter Estes. He would grant me in passing with some rehearsed verbal slight. Usually it was, "Still working on the Sisyphus project?" But sometimes he would feign concern to mock me. "Too bad you can't take samples from more than 100 years ago. Then you might find something interesting." The first time he said that, I actually replied by saying, "Most of the sampling was confined to 50 years or less into the past." He laughed heartily and derisively. Then there were the emails that accidentally got forwarded to me. The memes on social media were often somewhat amusing, so I doubt Peter had anything to do with them. Overhearing people repeating Peter's jokes about me did sting, especially when I heard Carol repeating them. Still stings a bit just writing it down here. The ability Peter had to get under my skin wasn't helped by the fact that Carol had left me for him, at least for a time, closer to the vernal equinox. I think I mentioned earlier that a brief stint at a farm really did wonders for getting Carol out of my head. Peter's real problem wasn't with me. It was that he got caught doing something he shouldn't have, and I was a convenient distraction. He had been studying Himalayan honeybees for years. Every summer he would head to Nepal and spend months in isolation, capturing, sampling, and recording isolated hives of Apis laboriosa, the giant Himalayan honeybee. The rest of the year, he would study the acutely psychoactive properties of the honey. His research into the properties looked to me like large rave-style parties with copious amounts of vomiting. A number of years back, a group working with him had isolated a compound which they thought might be effective in treating a pernicious form of schizophrenia, and, as a result of this finding, for a while, he had huge amounts of funding for his research. Peter was popular at the university because of the wild research/parties he threw. I was invited to a few when I first got here. I remember Anne, his wife, playing the perfect hostess and offering all the guests tiny oyster crackers with a single drop of psychoactive honey on each. People said Anne was not putting on an act and that she played to be the perfect tenured professor and future dean's wife in all things. She was pretty, but not intimidatingly beautiful. She wore just a little too much jewelry and makeup and usually a designer pantsuit, but not one from a very expensive designer. She knew everyone's name and just enough backstory to make it appear as if she knew who you were behind that name. She was so perfectly in character that one could not help but fall into a casual infatuation with her, and that was not just the psychoactive honey talking. The department has stories of one party where a professor of medieval history ate a whole bowl of crackers by mistake and ended up doing shocking things with a charcuterie board that resulted in a rather long hospitalization. Luckily, he had tenure. After that, Anne dutifully policed the just one cracker per person rule from a plate that only she had control of. I should point out, for those of you not familiar with the psychoactive honey of A. laboriosa, that even the highly active samples that Peter collected were not as psychoactive as some of the material the biochem department was rumored to have invented for military contracts in the not-so-distant past. That department was always working on weird military stuff. Paul used to work in that department. I should point out that Anne did all this, past tense, since she and Peter are not on friendly terms these days. Peter was discovered to have a secret family in Nepal, complete with 13-year-old twin boys who looked just like Peter. Apparently, Peter was not going alone into the mountains to study the V's. Anne got the house. She and the shadow wife in Nepal split some huge royalty account from a pharmaceutical company for the amazing psychoactive honey compound patent. Peter was left broke and sleeping in his office. He would surely have been sent packing if not for his tenure. Not that I'm bitter about how I will never get tenure. Initially, I felt some empathy towards Peter. I had done a wishy-washy, we are broken up thing with Carol just before news of his secret family broke, and imagined that we were somewhat kindred souls in our aloneness. I pictured him camped out in his office with dusty boxes of preserved bees and dirty clothes, similar to the disheveled state of sexual frustration I was, sans bees, existing in. Unfortunately, the very thing that had brought him financial ruin yielded up notoriety and attention, two things that can be more valuable than money in an academic environment. New articles about his past amazing discoveries were published. His office became the location of a regular vomit party. His office was also right near, almost inside, my lab. Some days his research vomit raves lasted till well after my sunrise stroll to work. I was just enjoying being thankful that Peter's latest party had not gone long when I ran into Carol stumbling back to Peter's office, wearing a dress so short it looked like a shirt. In order to torture myself more thoroughly and dig a nice deep rut in my brain, I would later pull the lab security videos and watch them a couple times. Maybe more than a couple times, actually. It was high resolution enough to cause permanent damage to my self-esteem. In a few days' time, I would traverse the RBB multiple times in the specific hope of erasing the event, and by extension, the memory of it from the universe. What I write down here is apparently the paradox-free event as my brain currently remembers it. "Oh, hi, Bob," Carol said. Her short party dress was studded with tiny lights that throbbed to the sound of her voice. "Carol?" I said, with the realization in my voice that the breakup was not as wishy-washy as I had imagined. "Oh, hey." The lights cooled slightly. They were apparently both mood and voice sensitive. I could see her actively being nonplussed by running into me. "Hey," I remember saying, just as I began to wonder if I was going to throw up right there or if I could make it to a trash can. I did not want to, under any circumstances, run to Peter's office to throw up. There were undoubtedly several convenient receptacles designed to capture surprise regurgitation in Peter's office, but Peter would be there, and also, probably, some of Carol's clothing. I was also beginning to realize that it was just a blouse and not a super short dress. "Hey," I said to no one in particular. Peter opened the door to his office and came stumbling out with something emitting a pulsating glow in his hand. He ignored me. "Hey," she said to either Peter or me, I did not know which, and the lights began to turn a little brighter. Shades of yellow and orange flashed across her chest. Hey, I replied. I actually think I'd lost the ability to say anything else. Look, Bob, she said with concern on her face, about this and Peter and, well, I would rather like it if you did not tell Paul. Paul? I run into her after she has essentially spent the night in my lab with the guy from the department who makes it his business to point out how impotent my research is, and she is worried about me telling my flatmate. Confusion hit me with enough force to make sure I was not going to make it anywhere. I was close to a sink. Every time I rewatched the footage, I hoped that this time I would vomit all over her pulsating form. Ardea herodias, the great blue heron, uses projectile vomiting to protect their nests. This would actually become an important factoid shortly after the event/accident. But I doubted if I had the aim to protect my lab space from Carol. All the evolved cognitive portions of my brain were shutting down, and I was left with only dinosaur bird defense mechanisms. Unfortunately, I did not have wings, or razor-sharp talons, or the beak to facilitate the more effective-sounding bird defense mechanisms. I began to wonder if I was going to crap myself in an imitation of a pigeon's even more impotent defense mechanism. Oh, hey, babe, Peter said in perfect douchebag. I did not know you stepped out. These were pulsating on the mattress, so I thought you were still there. He handed her a pair of leggings that were studded in the same light-emitting spots as her dress. The leggings synced up with the dress when she took them and began emitting the same bright red light her dress had taken on when Peter came out of his office. Hey, I said to Peter, but he was still ignoring me. You know what I found out about that dress, babe? It can record events where the wearer was really excited and then play them back. You just touch a couple of spots and then he began fumbling with her shoulder and her breast. Hey, I said in growing horror. Bob! Peter looked at me perplexed. What are you doing here? A little early to be working on the Sisyphus project, isn't it? Instead of replying with hey, I stared transfixedly as Carol's dress exploded with light. Her breasts were white-hot in shadows that looked like ephemeral hands moved across the glowing surface of her dress. She was a glowing Venus being seduced by a specter of darkness in front of me. Her crotch became the brightest source of light in the room, and my eyes trailed an afterburn when she moved. Shadow hands, and was that a head and then a whatever, made the light flicker crazily. The light was breathing the respiration of a woman in the throes of passion, except for the places bursting with an impossible heart rate. Many of the motion-activated lights in the room were not on, yet it was suddenly lit up like midday. Hey, I softly said. Peter hooked an arm around the flashing disco light of my ex-girlfriend and ushered her back to his office. You'll want to put those on in here now that people are showing up. And these, he said, producing a wad of cloth from his pocket. Hey, I said to the now empty room. I made it all the way to the bathroom before throwing up. I suppose that is the way of it. I watched the video several times and then ran it through in my head so often that I can write it down without really thinking about it. After I was done in the bathroom, I picked up the control module for the day's time sampling experiment. My mind was no longer running the happy fantasy loop. The video from the lab, that I would watch so many times, shows that I did not do the normal triple checks on the control parameters in the module. This is an important piece of evidence for those searching for an explanation of the event/accident that does not reference ancient aliens. It was a short walk catty-corner across the mall to the museum where the sampling experiment would take place. Gone was all of the beauty and peace I had been luxuriating in. I had absolutely decided to go live on a farm for the rest of my life. You have been listening to Chapter 1 of The Bubble Bath Paradox, written and read by Steve Parker. Music by the incomparable Victor McSurley.